can you hear me okay?
I can hear you now.
Okay. Well, first of all, I really appreciate you having the hearing. I have enjoyed listening to our witnesses and hearing your and Senator Menendez's opening comments. I have a question for each of the witnesses, just quickly, if we could, at the start. We have so many challenges with China, and as former U.S. trade representative, we haven't even gotten into some of the detailed trade challenges that we've had. But competitiveness, and we've talked about the human rights challenges. We've talked about the challenge to our technology and our innovation, which I want to talk about in a moment. But to each of the witnesses, just very, very quickly, how would you describe our relationship with China? And specifically, would you consider China to be an adversary, a global competitor, an enemy? How would you describe China today in relation to its relationship to the United States?
Mr. Stillwell, why don't you start with you?
Senator, thank you for that question. I can answer that fairly quickly. Our official policy is China as a strategic competitor. I will note that in internal conversations in the PRC, they refer to the United States as the enemy. They've been doing that since 1950. In 2012, in the headline of the People's Daily, when one of their Communist Party members ended up in the Chengdu consulate, the headline was, the comrade Wang Lijun has defected to the enemy, unashamedly noting that. And so if you look at the difference in approaches and attitudes toward each other, I think you can see that the approach from the Trump administration was long overdue, and yet we are not using the word enemy. We are simply competing. And in simply competing, we're having great effect in normalizing Chinese behavior in the United States and its adverse behavior in the United States and elsewhere in the world. And the number of folks who are coming in support verbally and strongly from these two regions and all others is growing considerably as people recognize that the economic threats, you don't have to bow to those. You can stand up for your sovereignty. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else have a different description other than strategic competitor?
Senator, it's Phil Rieker from the European Bureau. I would echo the term strategic competitor as we describe it, certainly in the national security strategy, but to point out that in Europe, we see this as the PRC trying to establish their own strategic foothold there and indeed promote an authoritarian model of governance and state-controlled economy and challenge U.S. national security by weakening our political and economic and military ties. Indeed, over the last, say, 12 years, the PRC gained increasing influence over European markets and supply chains, something the Europeans, particularly since COVID, have been focusing on in terms of resilience and working with us on that. The 2008 financial crisis really exposed that, where the PRC, with lots of cash, came in and targeted investment strategies, strategic industries, and critical infrastructure, including ports and other things. We've seen a real sea change, particularly in the last 3 years, this awakening that Secretary Pompeo has talked about, due to our own realization of China's long-term strategy, sharing that with our European partners and allies, including at NATO, where we've officially put into NATO's doctrine going forward to look at the challenges and opportunities of the PRC as a strategic competitor. And you've seen the Europeans, of course, adopt investment screening mechanisms at the national level. The EU itself adopting, for instance, a cyber sanctions thing. They had their first designation of a Chinese entity under their cyber sanction regulation.
Secretary, thank you. Thanks for that. Let me get to another question. And first of all, I appreciate the hard work that you're doing in Europe, and I think people have begun to wake up to the challenge. And having been in Europe pre-COVID to talk about some of these challenges, they do need to wake up, and they can. You mentioned the CFIUS type screenings in Europe, finally catching up. You know, they're looking to us to provide some information there to understand better how they can screen investments. You know, so many of the challenges we face, we talked about this morning, the answer is let's work with with others and require China to do certain things and impose on China, you know, some additional level of the playing field, fairness, and so on. And I don't disagree with that. And I mentioned trade earlier. That's an example where sometimes they have done things that either by subsidizing or by selling below costs that are just wrong and violate the international norms. But it seems to me a lot of our more productive approach to China would be getting our own house in order. Competitiveness would be the most obvious example of that. But there's another one that I've worked on a lot with some colleagues on the committee, including the bipartisan leadership of this committee, and that is, how do you safeguard American intellectual property, American innovation, American taxpayer-paid research? And we have legislation called the Safeguarding American Innovation Act. It comes out of a year-long investigation into this issue and was able to expose that really for 2 decades, China has been systematically targeting American researchers, usually, again, U.S. taxpayer-paid research, and systematically taking that research back to China. Since we came out with our report and since we had a shocking hearing on this topic about what has happened, the FBI, Department of Justice, U.S. attorneys have stepped up, and there have been several very public arrests of Chinese researchers, particularly with their 1,000 Talents program, who have, again, taken U.S. paid research and taken it to China to help fuel the Chinese economy really over the last 2 decades, and also the Chinese military, because some of this research is actually military research. So that legislation we're trying to get passed on the floor now. We have 19 bipartisan co-sponsors, including Chairman Risch. It is not only the result of a year-long investigation and a hearing, it's also been reported out of the Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee. And I will tell you, we're now told that the FBI is opening a new China-related investigation every 10 hours with about 2,500 open counterintelligence investigations across the country. That's public information. And so we know more in classified settings we can't talk about today. But the point is, our American research, our innovation has been going out the door, particularly to China, other countries as well. But China is, through its talents programs, the main perpetrator. And my point is, we have 5 things in this legislation we have to do internally to tighten up. And this is not about telling China what they have to do. Frankly, it's about telling our universities and our research institutions and our federal agencies like NIH, National Science Foundation, the Department of Energy, and others, they have to tighten up. It's tightening up our visa requirements. When we know people are coming here to steal technology, we need a way to help the State Department be able to screen those folks. So I wonder if any of you have any comments on Safeguarding America's Innovation Act and the need for us to get our own house in order here to be able to protect taxpayer-paid research and to be, therefore, more competitive in an increasingly difficult climate with China.
Senator, I'll answer that very briefly. You saw the closure of the Houston consulate. This is just the tip of the iceberg of all the things that we've been doing that align very nicely with what you're discussing. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Senator Portman, we're really short on time here. If you have some
I
additional
would just
follow-up.
ask them to respond for the record, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the time.
Yeah, that would